This new civilization only needed electrification and the truths of the Communist Party.
Well, the whole thing was one big lie to the extent that it was never admitted that anything was wrong with the system. It was never admitted that it wasn't working. It was, above all, never admitted that Stalin was not right about everything, in everything he said, everything he did. But anybody could see that that was not so.
Stalin's first big lie grew out of his deliberate starvation of the peasants in the Ukraine. In 1932, Stalin demanded a grain delivery from there that led to mass hunger. Stalin's agents seized the last remnants of food stocks. Resistance was met by the burning of villages, terror, mass executions. One party activist later described the terror and the lies.
In the terrible year 1933, I saw women and children with distended bellies turning blue. I heard children choking on their own screams. It was excruciating to see this. But I told myself I mustn't give in to pity. For communism, everything was permissible, to lie and to destroy even millions of people.
Three million children born in 1932 died of starvation. Almost all these photographs appeared in American newspapers in 1933. Despite censorship, the West did get accurate reports on the starvation being inflicted on one of Europe's biggest nations. Western reporters defied Stalin's censors and thugs and went to find the truth. Prominent among them was Malcolm Muggeridge.
Well, there was a terrific lot of talk that there was a very severe famine there, but it was almost impossible to get any solid information about it. And so I thought I'd just go down there. And I just took a chance and got a railway ticket and went off to Kiev and Rostov and got off the train at different places.
As I began to be very critical of the whole setup, criticize the use of terrorism by the government, the articles that I wrote on the famine would undoubtedly, I would have had to leave, but I sent those over in a diplomatic bag. They would never have got out of the country otherwise, and I left before they had appeared.
But truth-tellers like Muggeridge had to contend with men like Edouard Herriot, twice Premier of France, who said the famine was a lie of the bourgeois press.
J'ai déjà visité Odessa et Kiev. J'ai été partout très intéressé par l'effort admirable d'organisation qui a été réalisé.
Президент Еріот сказав, я щасливий прибути сюди з послом Франції та моїми колегами по парламенту французькому та столиці України.
Many left-wing visitors like George Bernard Shaw and H.G. Wells came to praise Stalin, not to bury him. H.G. Wells said, apart from individual atrocities, the Red Terror did kill for a reason. But many were just duped.
Well, they were literally taken for a ride. They were filled up with vodka and caviar. They were shown model collective farms. There's a Russian word, pokazhuka, which really sums up. They're very good at window dressing.
Hello, all my friends in America. Hello, all you dear boobs who have been saying for a month past that I have gone dotty about Russia. Well, if the latest news from your side is true, you can hardly be saying that now. Russia has the laugh of us. She has us fooled, beaten, shamed, shown up, outpointed. Russia flaunts her budget surplus of 150 million. her people employed to the last man and woman, her scientific agriculture doubling and trebling her harvests, her roaring and multiplying factories, her efficient rulers, her atmosphere of such hope and security as has never before been seen in a civilized country on earth.
Walter Duranty of the New York Times supported Stalin's lies to keep a privileged place in Moscow.
Mausoleum on Earth.
Scientists who grappled with the world's worst nuclear accident. It's a story of disaster far greater than ever admitted, and of human lives sacrificed to a political cover-up at Chernobyl.
And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers, and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood.
In Russian, there's another name for the wormwood that brings so much bitterness. That name is Chernobyl. In the early hours of April the 26th, reactor number 4 at Chernobyl power station exploded. Tens of thousands of people will die as a result of Chernobyl, and the effects of its radioactive fallout are still being felt as far away as Britain. The Ukraine is the Soviet Union's second largest republic. In its northern farmland and forest lies the small town of Chernobyl. 5 years after the disaster, this week has gone inside the 30-kilometer exclusion zone that now surrounds the accident site to investigate the Chernobyl tragedy. Entrance to the exclusion zone is closely controlled by the KGB, but with the help of scientists working there who now want to tell the truth, we were able to gain unique access to this desolate, devastated territory. At the bleak heart of this forbidden zone, the dark tower of Chernobyl itself, the sarcophagus covering the ruined reactor. In the company of a man who knows the truth about Chernobyl probably better than anyone still alive, we're going to find out what happened here at the world's worst nuclear accident. What Chernobyl did, what it's doing now, and what it could still do to generations yet to be born. Following the accident, Vladimir Chernousenko was sent to direct a scientific task force at Chernobyl. A nuclear physicist, Chernousenko says the scale of the catastrophe has been concealed by the Soviet Union. In particular, that far more radioactive material was released than was ever admitted.
According to the data that was given to the International Atomic Energy Agency, only 3% was emitted. But this information should be regarded from the point of view that, first of all, the quantity of fuel, which we threw off the roofs, was about 120 tons. And we estimate that more than 60 to 80% was ejected from the reactor.
Abandoned equipment, machinery and materials litter the Chernobyl site, all of it too contaminated for use or recovery. Our radiation monitors warned us of levels of radioactivity 100 times higher than normal 5 years after the accident. This is a place which, for safety's sake, should have been abandoned. Radiation has fatally damaged Chernousenko's health, but he's remained here as scientific director of the exclusion zone. With his colleagues, he's given this week the insider's story of Chernobyl. It was the communist system itself, secretive and authoritarian, says Chernousenko, that was fundamentally to blame for what happened at Chernobyl. Soviet reactors were conceived in secrecy to produce plutonium for atomic weapons. Increased in size to generate electricity, dangerous designs were forced through because they were cheap. 12 enormous RBMKs were planned for Chernobyl. By 1986, 4 were operational.
The accident at Chernobyl showed that sooner or later the design faults built into the RBMK reactors had to lead to disaster.
On the night of the accident, the operators were conducting an experiment with the electricity generator, unaware that at low power the reactor was dangerously unstable, liable to run out of control.
The first thing I saw when I ran into the turbine hall was that the panels were beginning to collapse, and you could see jets and leaks of water and steam. Everything was out of control. And then the oil caught fire, and a fire started.
The faulty design meant that when the operators hit the emergency shutdown button, the reactor simply accelerated to disaster.
At that moment, the brake pedal acted as an extra accelerator would on a car. It made the car go faster instead of slowing it down. That's how it was with this unpredictable acceleration of the reactor. The regulations give no guidance about this situation. The operators working on the reactor were not made aware of this possibility.
Now the cover-up began. Rather than admit they built reactors that were fundamentally unsafe, the Soviet government pinned all the blame for the accident on the operators. It was the operators rather than the guilty designers who were hauled into court and, after a trial closed to the foreign press, were convicted and sent to prison. Pripyat was a town of 46,000 people, purpose-built to house the nuclear power station's workforce. As the blazing reactor, just 3 kilometers away, began to spew out radioactive material, the Soviet authorities tried to cover up the accident. Though they knew that radiation levels were rising, putting the population in danger, they refused to give the alarm. But while party bosses refused to alert ordinary people to the extreme danger they were in, they were quick to protect their own. They put their wives and children on the planes to Moscow that were evacuating the firefighters and the operators, now terminally ill with appalling radiation burns. In Pripyat, for 36 hours after the accident, there was still no warning. Yet each single hour, men, women and children were getting more radiation than it's safe to receive in a whole year.
We were given no information. Information about the accident reached us 2 hours before the evacuation via a local radio announcement to the effect that we would be evacuated in 2 hours' time.
For about 3 hours, we travelled along earth roads to a village surrounded by clouds of dust, which was already radioactive. All that dust settled on the people. There were crowds of people and masses of buses. At 1400 hours, a column of military vehicles carrying equipment and soldiers was coming in the opposite direction. These soldiers were in respirators, but the people who were leaving Pripyat didn't have respirators.
People were told they were leaving for 3 days, but they would never be allowed to return. In Moscow, the May Day parade went ahead as usual. President Gorbachev had proclaimed the new era of glasnost, but not for another fortnight would he tell his countrymen anything about what he already knew to be the world's worst nuclear disaster. In Kiev, capital of the Ukraine, the wind had changed. Radioactivity from Chernobyl, 100 kilometers to the north, was now blowing towards the city. Yet here too, no warnings were given. Spring holiday crowds enjoyed the good weather without realizing they were risking future cancers, exposed to radiation levels hundreds of times higher than was safe. Rumors sent people in panic to the railway station, but party leaders wouldn't act to save them.
On the night of the 5th and 6th of May, the question of the evacuation of Kiev was already being discussed. This is a huge city of 3.5 million people, and unfortunately in Moscow on the 6th of May, they retreated from the idea of evacuating Kiev. And it should be emphasized that this decision was taken by the government and by Gorbachev in 1986.
For 10 days, Chernobyl continued to burn, sending plumes of radioactive dust far beyond the Soviet border. The accident could no longer be entirely hidden. In apparent reversal of their secrecy so far, the Russians now made an unprecedented show of explaining to the world what had happened. In Vienna, the assembled experts of the International Atomic Energy Agency, desperately worried about the effect of Chernobyl on their own nuclear programs, were quick to accept the Soviet account. Eagerly, the IAEA thanked the Russians for what they called a frank and open presentation of excellent reports.
Not everything was correctly explained in Vienna, and not everything was honest. And it seemed to me that the IAEA, as an international organization of experts, could have adopted a more careful and responsible attitude towards this information. But unfortunately, it suited the IAEA to approach the matter as they did, because the most important thing for them, so it appears to me 5 years later, was not the truth of the picture that was presented, but the future attitude of people all over the world towards the further development of atomic energy.
The Russians said everything was under control, but at Chernobyl, Chernosenko and his colleagues were taking potentially fatal doses of radiation.
For almost 2.5 months, we had been constantly hovering over the top of Block 4, and I felt that it was drawing me towards itself, because we had already managed to make out each little detail of it from above. During that period, we got a dose of 400 Roentgens, while we were sitting in the cockpit of the helicopter, covering the block with a special anti-dust coating.
To convince the world they'd contained the disaster, the government ordered Yuri Samoylenko to liquidate the consequences of the accident and reopen the remaining reactors. Viktor Golubev was the engineer responsible for working out how to use machines to clear the radioactive debris in this murderous environment. Vladimir Chernousenko, the nuclear scientist who knew what radioactivity could do, had the impossible task of devising ways in which men might somehow survive unprecedented levels of radiation. Together, these three men went through the horror of clearing up a nuclear disaster. Today, they're still together, still working in the radioactive conditions of the special 10-kilometer zone that surrounds the reactor.
In the special zone, we were working on the rectification of the consequences of the accident. It was a huge task. Well, one of the jobs was especially dangerous, the clearing up of highly radioactive debris. Anyway, we did this job.
The first men to risk their lives in what was called the liquidation were coal miners, volunteers who dug tunnels for a new foundation beneath the smouldering reactor. The secret terror at Chernobyl was that the still molten reactor core might dissolve its concrete base and begin an unstoppable meltdown into the earth, the China syndrome. At the tunnel entrance, the radiation was so high that miners who spent even an hour there would collapse with radiation sickness. After a fortnight, thousands of these volunteers were in a desperate state. The reactor explosion had spread tons of fuel and graphite from the core all over the roof of the next-door reactor. To remove it, they tried radio-controlled robots. To reopen the other reactors, the roof had to be cleared and all the dangerous debris pushed back into the remains of number 4 reactor. But most of the robots simply couldn't stand the extraordinary radiation fields, as Golubov recalls.
There were huge piles of fuel there, whole fuel rods thrown out of the reactor and piles of graphite. And we put this thing to work there and it simply went mad. Just like that, without any warning, it started crawling along the edge of the platform, damn near fell off the platform next to the chimney and into the debris.
While the roof was being cleared, the ruined reactor was being buried. Around it rose an improvised steel and concrete tomb, the sarcophagus. According to Chena Usenko, all this was only necessary because of the political decision to restart the remaining reactors. And now came a terrible moment. They were ready to close the sarcophagus, but the debris still littered the roof.
By the beginning of September 1986, all the robots had broken down on the roof. So there could be only one decision at that moment, either to stop work on the sarcophagus and look for other ways of operating robot units, which could have been bought from the West or built in a short period of time, or follow a purely political line and drive ahead with the work on the sarcophagus so as to complete its closure quickly. So that's why I think that the decision taken was not a scientific or a technical decision, but a purely political one. At any cost, as quickly as possible, to carry out the removal of all the highly radioactive debris from the roofs of block number 3. That's why on the 19th of September, the government commission took the decision to send men into the high-activity fields. I emphasize, they decided to send people into areas of lethal radiation. This decision was taken, and we began the operation on the 19th of September.
The dreadful decision made, Samoylenko prepared to use people instead of machines.
So you see, the most difficult thing was to take that decision, that we would rely on human beings to carry out that operation. That was the most difficult thing. After that, it was all just details. After that, professionalism took over. The calculation of time allowances, the working out of routes and the operation of video, explaining the job to people, briefing them, equipping them with clothing and dosimeters, and all on a mass scale.
Как только вы подниметесь на лестницу, не торопитесь сразу кидаться на работу. Зайдите за трубу в восточную часть и отдышитесь. Вот сюда вот. Да, вот сюда. Проведет. По этим пожарным рукавам, вот сюда, и за угол здания забежите. У кого нож есть, здесь были офицеры. Идем. 10 трубок. Сколько? 10 трубок было, да? И там еще околотрубные, такие как полусферы.
They did their best to protect men from the radiation waiting for them on the roof, but their primitive equipment was never enough.
Нет, ну я же сказал начальнику штаба, что принесли сюда граммы. Ребята, ваша группа, когда отработает, тогда... тогда мы сделаем.
Так, внимание, товарищи бойцы, поняли? Поднимайтесь на вторую площадку и продолжайте так, как инструктор. Ну что там?
Lethal radioactive material was going to be tackled by hand.
Вот вам отводится 1 минута для того, чтобы решить следующую задачу. Вот посмотрите за своими товарищами, как они ускоренно передвигаются из этой амбразуры поворачиваете направо за вот это сооружение. С вами, кстати, пойдет лейтенант выводной.
Cherno Usenko had himself measured the radiation levels on the roof. If anyone spent more than 5 minutes in that terrible killing zone, they would surely die. Wave after wave of military conscripts and reservists were sent in. There was just time to fill a shovel, step ever so carefully to the parapet, empty it into the remains of the reactor below, and then repeat the process once more. All the time, life ebbing away as men counted down the seconds they had left.
They even referred to these people as bio-robots, who could be pushed out onto the roof, where they would get a radiation overdose within a minute and then be thrown out of the zone. That's what this whole epic amounted to.
For the men who fought the invisible enemy, there was a reward, a piece of paper that said they were heroes.
Спасибо вам за выполненную задачу. Доброго здоровья и благополучия. Награждайтесь грамотой, почетной и денежной премией, который объявил Юрий Николаевич. Вручить вам почетный за выполнение ответственного задания. Награждаетесь почетной грамотой. Желаю вам доброго здоровья, благополучия и стать достойным офицером.
With the roof cleared, the sarcophagus closed, the other reactors could now be decontaminated. Their reopening proudly reported to Moscow. Cherno Usenko maintains that all of this was utterly unnecessary, a needless criminal sacrifice of human life.
It was simply for political ambitions and a mistaken decision to concentrate every effort on the special site area and at any price, I repeat, at any price, to restart the power station, whose energy contribution is virtually insignificant even in the Ukraine, so that the country could have easily done without it.
Moscow acknowledged the terrible radiation injuries the first Chernobyl victims suffered. Until now, it's refused to discuss what's happened to the many thousands of liquidators. Their radiation doses are state secrets.
Third Main Department of Public Health, USSR. Directive U-2617, secret. Paragraph 9. No information concerning the degree of radioactive contamination by people who took part in the liquidation of the consequences of the breakdown at the Chernobyl power station may be disclosed. Signed, Head of Department, Shulzenko.
The official figures say that 31 people died as a result of this accident here at Chernobyl. What is the truth?
They quoted the figures correctly, that is, what was published in the newspapers, the figure of 30 participants who died in this whole tragedy. The press never gave any further figures. We tried to make an assessment based on the actual facts as we know them, on the letters of former liquidators, and the figure we arrived at was between 5,000 and 7,000 people. That is, the number of people who took part in the emergency operation and who have already died.
At the end, they stood on the battlefield to cheer the memory of the men who died or will die fighting for it. Cherno Usenko and his friends have shortened their lives too. Why risk their careers by speaking out now?
I realized that matters which affect people's lives should not be kept secret. The main thing is always to speak only the truth, however bitter it may be. I realize that in this situation I am taking a risk to some extent, because the representatives of the higher-ranking authorities, perhaps going against common sense, sometimes take decisions which are not motivated primarily by public safety, but by some kind of political directive. I think that what happened to us, to me, to my friends, that understanding which we gained as a result of taking part in the operation, all these things give me the right to speak the real truth about what actually happened and about what needs to be done to prevent any repetition.
Next Thursday, This Week continues its Chernobyl revelations about the nuclear dumps that now threaten the water supply, about other current nuclear accidents in Russia, and how continued radioactive contamination endangers both the children of Chernobyl and future generations of our own. That's Cover Up at Chernobyl, The Bitter Legacy, next Thursday at 8:30 on ITV.
Nuclear reactor, the full truth is only just beginning to emerge. A Fragile Earth special now on 4 reveals the disturbing extent of the legacy inherited by the children of Chernobyl.
On the 26th of April 1986, Unit 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power station exploded. It was the worst nuclear accident in history. The explosion blew open the reactor core, releasing 90 times as much radioactivity as the Hiroshima bomb. The Soviet government's first response to the disaster was to impose a news blackout. For 5 years, they have sought to conceal the full consequences. Only now is the true scale of what has happened coming to light. The children of the region are falling ill. New illnesses are appearing which baffle the doctors. These children are suffering from a form of baldness doctors have not seen before. It is resistant to treatment. No cure has been found. The director of the hospital in which these children are treated did not wish them to be filmed. She denied they were there. Under pressure from Moscow, the Soviet medical establishment is reluctant to blame Chernobyl for the growing health problems of a generation of children, the legacy of the explosion 5 years ago.
В эту ночь я была на дежурстве. Еще перед дежурством меня какое-то охватывало такое чувство или предчувствие, может быть, беды. И вдруг раздался взрыв. Вот именно такой резкий взрыв, я даже на минуту, у меня потемнело в глазах. Смотрю на небо и не могу понять, какое-то такое свечение, как в какой-то сказке Змея Горыныча. И у меня вдруг появилась вот такая мысль. Думаю, я же такое видела. Вот по телевизору, когда показывают, например, или какой-то спутник отправляет, вот самый настоящий вот этот вот ядерный взрыв, вот этот гриб, ядерный гриб.
Все, Саш, туши, уходи.
The radiation level on the reactor roof was enough to kill a man in minutes. The explosion was so powerful, it blew the reactor's 2,000-ton steel lid clean off the top of the core, littering the roof with intensely radioactive pieces of graphite. When the robots broke down because of the extreme radioactivity, men were sent in to clean up the site. They were not volunteers. They were picked up off the streets and press-ganged onto the roof. These men had 90 seconds to complete a single shift. After that, they had to leave the area completely. In those 90 seconds, they received their maximum permissible lifetime dose of radiation. The men were sent home and forgotten. Of the 800 men who were sent on the roof, survivors put the number of dead at 350. They do not figure in any official casualty lists. The men were sacrificed because there is a chronic shortage of electricity in the Soviet Union. The authorities were desperate to keep the other 3 reactors at the station open. Chernobyl Power Station still produces electricity. It never closed. In all, 600,000 men were drafted in from all over the Soviet Union to help in the cleanup and decontamination of the region. Although the official casualty figure now stands at 250, more than 5,000 people are thought to have died so far.
Как раз в эту ночь с 25 на 26 находился на дежурстве. Сидели в пожарной части, играли в шахматы. Поступил сигнал тревоги, мы выехали, быстро собрались, выехали на машине на место загорания.
Левее луч, Саша, ну что ж ты справа меня откатываешь? Левее, задвинь левую стену.
Когда мы уже подъезжали, мы увидели, что горит, что часть реактора развернута, вывалена стена и горит крыша. Везде, там где-то еще горело в нескольких местах.
The first fire crews on the scene were completely unprepared for a major reactor fire. They had no proper protective clothing against radiation.
Когда мы приехали туда на место, видели какие-то куски бесформенные в середине с дыркой. Он сказал, что это, говорит, это графит из реактора, значит, разрушена активная зона реактора, что здесь должен быть приличный фон, что может быть опасно в большой степени для здоровья. Некоторые подходили, отшвыривали его ногой, но чтобы не загорелись, он был горячий, чтобы не загорелись колеса машин, плавился асфальт от него, отбрасывали ногами некоторые. Один даже схватил рукой, хотел посмотреть, что это такое. Вот, этого сейчас нету. Умер. Степан Комар умер 4 сентября в этом году.
By 5 a.m., the fires on the roof were under control. The first dosimetrists arrived.
Начали мерить. Фон оказался настолько большим, что невозможно было замерить. Фон от нас там, частички пыли, графита. Пришел дозиметрист, говорит, что же я буду мерить? Говорит, мой прибор уже давно опасную черту приступил, скажем так. Потом, первое, что было, это очень сильная усталость. Начинало подташнивать, хотелось где-то сесть, лечь, отдохнуть, обо всем забыться. Начинало гореть тело, лицо. Люди теряли сознание, начинались рвоты, и по одному, по два забирали в санчасть, оттуда подъезжала скорая, оттуда уже переводили в больницу.
Было очень много больных, и некуда было их госпитализировать. Поэтому мы даже этих больных ложили матрасы на пол. Эти были больные очень бледные, и у них была рвота. И у нас такая была какая-то мысль, как вроде бы произошло массовое отравление.
2 miles from the burning reactor, the 50,000 inhabitants of Pripyat woke to a normal Saturday. Life in the town went on as usual.
Муж был дома. Я стала ему рассказывать, что что-то случилось на станции. Но он мне не поверил, говорит, подвел к окну и говорит, смотри, люди идут на пляж. Соседи, дети пошли играть в песочек. Я увидела, стоит бронетранспортер. Меня это вообще ужаснуло. У меня такое какое-то ощущение, что, думаю, чему он здесь, зачем он стоит, что какая-то война. Потом, смотрю, множество народу выходит в военной форме. Я различия немножко знаю. Форма генерала, он так еще рукой провел и сказал, вот здесь будут проходить автобусы. Меня вообще охватил ужас. Думаю, что же такое произошло? Что же будет?
The flashes on this film are caused by radioactivity. By Saturday evening, radiation levels in Pripyat were intense. But it was not until 12 hours later that the bewildered population were finally told what had happened.
Внимание, внимание! Уважаемые товарищи, в связи с аварией на Чернобыльской атомной электростанции в городе Припяти складывается неблагоприятная радиационная обстановка. Сегодня, 27 апреля, начиная с 14:00 часов, возникает необходимость провести временную эвакуацию жителей города в близлежащие населенные пункты Киевской области.
Believing that they would be away for just a few days, the people of Pripyat packed their bags and boarded the buses. They were never to return. 30 miles from Chernobyl lies the town of Poliske. The town lay directly in the path of the first radioactive plume. The evacuees were heading for a place that was itself already heavily contaminated.
А це в неділю надвечір повно автобусів і просили розмістіть, забирайте людей з Прип'яті. І ми вірили про те, що там нічого серйозного, що це вони 2-3 дні в нас перебудуть і все. Но я живу в одному будинку з головою райвиконкому, він просто з другої сторони. Я бачу, що вони ночі з прокурором вивозять своїх дітей. Розумієте? Що ж таке? У мене 3 діток малесеньких було. І я прошу, дайте мені якусь путівку, чи що, щоб я теж виїхала. Вони ж виїжджають. Нам треба рядувати, кажу, саме многодітні сім'ї, бо вони самі на руки 3 дітей, кажу, я теж не візьму. У кого 5, у кого 10. Ну, сказали, в нас все нормально.
In the following weeks, 135,000 people were moved out of the immediate area and an 18-mile exclusion zone was set up around Chernobyl. Outside this zone, dozens of small villages were fenced off and evacuated. The radiation had spread far beyond the exclusion zone. A territory twice the size of Britain with over 17 million people was contaminated. 5 years on, more than 3 million people still live on contaminated land.
Ні, так ви ж візьміть, яка справедливість. Варовичі одовіселили, Бобер одовіселили. Мартиновичі будуть виселяти. А наше село каже чиста зона. Там платять, тут платити не хочу. Що ж така несправедливість? Чого ж воно 30 кілометрів? Як це? Ну що така невже тут зонтик якийсь? Чи в нас той Сархван давно стояв наперед?
All the food produced on this farm is radioactive. This sugar beet will be fed to the cattle, whose milk and meat is radioactive. Yet the farmers of the region are encouraged to produce more food each year. In line with official plans, food production is rising in the contaminated areas. The food produced here finds its way to the markets of Kiev and is secretly distributed throughout the Soviet Union.
Як вам тут живеться? Чи є тут радіація?
Ну, що ми будемо казати, чи ми знаємо її, чи яка вона. Якби це ж воно там показало все, воно, що
Ми не бачимо її, але чувствуємо.
Чувствуємо.
Що ви чувствуєте?
Що ми чувствуємо?
Здоров'я наше падає.
І руки болять. До Бог знає,
як воно
одразиться далі.
А що ви їсте тут?
Усе їмо. Що є у нас, те їмо.
І корови маєте?
І корови маємо, і молоко доїмо, і здаємо. І їмо самі, і сир їмо, і сметану їмо, все їмо. І картоплю їмо, і капусту їмо, і огурця, якого виростимо. Все ми їмо своє.
І яблуко, все.
І яблуко.
І діти.
І діти. Так, і внуку я внуці даю своє.
Кажуть, що тут молоко не можна пити, яке тут виробляють.
А ми ж їмо,
що ми будемо пити? Що ми
нам кажуть, що не можна.
Нам кажуть, але ж ми подемо.
The people here have no option but to eat their own produce. Despite official promises, the state has been unable to provide them with safe food from outside. The Soviet economy is in crisis. The government faces a chronic food shortage. It can afford neither to feed the rural population nor move them out.
Як ви думаєте, багато горя приніс нам Чорнобиль?
А що мало?
Без конца.
А що мало?
І без краю всім нашим і потомкам хватить його.
Хіба це треба,
щоб це дитятко, кажи, щоб у пісочку не гуляйся, воно ж цього не знає, що це в ньому не можна гулятися. Кажи, не купайся, вони ж хочуть купатися. Гриби, у ліс не йди, ягоди не бери, гриба не бери. Позбавили всього на світі нас.
Я, ви знаєте, бажаю і закликала всіх наших матерів в 86-му році. Я була і в Романенка, бувшого міністра, він був у нас в інституті. Я була і в Шевченко Валентини Семенівни. Я осінню цього року Вірніше, вибачте, 89-го року була в делегації в Москву до Горбачова, де ми пробивали виселення. Я була і в Шевченко знову зимою, Масола була я у делегації. І кругом я говорила одне: не говори, що радіофобія. Діти, в мене 3 дітей, я по них бачу, по учнях бачу, по школі бачу, що стан дітей незадовільний в здоров'ї. Коли це було таке, щоб дитина сиділа і лилася кров на зошит? Коли це було таке, щоб дитині ставало погано, відкривалася не з того, не з цього рвота? Ну, такого ж не було раніше. І діти ж саме обличчя говорять про те, що вони нездорові.
In this contaminated forest on the outskirts of Poliska, there is a radioactive hotspot which is higher than anywhere inside the sealed-off exclusion zone. Unknown to the people of the town, the spot is marked only on unpublished official maps. Parents and teachers face the impossible task of trying to keep their children away from such areas.
Хто скаже, чому ми не зможемо з вами піти на екскурсію, як раніше, в парк, поїхати в ліс на екскурсію? Хто скаже, діти? Будь ласка, Яна.
Бо радіація.
Радіація. Де вона осіла, діти? Де радіація? Де радіація є?
На деревах і на землі.
На деревах і на землі. От завтра, діти, субота, а потім вихідний день у вас. Куди б ви хотіли піти з батьками своїми? Куди б ти хотіла піти? А? Куди б ти хотіла піти?
На качелі.
На качелі. А чи ми можемо піти, діти, на качелі з батьками в парк, Люба? Не можемо. А чому ми не можемо піти на качелі в парк? Кругом радіація, і в нас качелі закриті.
The contaminated zones are littered with more than 800 nuclear dumps of abandoned radioactive material. The radiation is now leaking into the groundwater of the region. As the contamination spreads through the water table, a second environmental catastrophe could occur. If the underground dams which have been built to contain the groundwater are breached, the river Dnieper, which provides drinking water for 35 million people, could become contaminated. Already, the silt at the bottom of the river is radioactive. It is moving towards the Black Sea 400 miles to the south, where rice growing on the banks of the river has already had to be stopped.
Бобри більше 1000 чоловік проживало. Бобр село велике. І як ми проїжджали самі, то ви добре бачили, які домики, люди построїлись, а тепер погнали отуди. Та й не хоче там жити. Старі люди вон так воляться.
Vasil Hrushchenko was evacuated from Bober in 1986. Every so often, he revisits his former home. It's illegal for him to do so.
Ой. Йоп, цьому, блядь, полу зносу немає. Да зносу немає цьому полу. Ой, Боже мой, Боже. Потом, если нас макубірували, так коли руководяща сила, так вони могли своє все забрати. А якщо ми колгоспники, такі ми нічого не могли взяти. І все пропало, а міліція геть все забрала. А потім нам запретили в село їхати. А начальникам можна було їхати. Вони позабирали де що не є. І доски, і кругом усе позабирали. Я ж його з дому не брав. Бо я такий жадний, як він. Господи, прости мені грішному. Ні, це ведро. Ай-яй-яй. Ой, божечки мой. Дуже больно. Лучше б мене розстріляли, чим села евакуювали.
А мене перед Новим роком визивали в райком партії мого директора, як мого керівника. І сиділи всі в президії райкомівські працівники і казали, що ви бунтуєте народ, нас нормально. Я кажу, як же нормально, коли 350-400 кюри на квадратний кілометр є на місцях, як же нормально, діти падають, як нормально. Закрий рота, тому що одержиш своє. От так мені сказав навіть голова райсполкому. У нас нема ще справедливості ніякої. Люди беззахисні. Наш райком партії робив перші 4 роки все тільки для того, щоб скрити правдиву інформацію. Скрити.
Kiev, third city of the Soviet Union, with a population of 3 million people. On the 1st of May, with the reactor still burning out of control 70 miles to the north, the radioactive cloud passed over the city. It was the morning of the May Day parades. As the radioactive dust fell on Kiev, the people of the city were on the streets. The authorities had decided not to tell them about the accident. The citizens of Kiev were needlessly contaminated.
Но мы же не знали, что произошло. Так слухи ходили, а что в самом деле мы не знали. Мы ничего не знали, тем более демонстрация была в городе. Все как обычно, все гуляли. А так, дети гуляли без